Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of the Evil Dead remake. You know, when I was a kid, I'd prowl the aisles of video stores, remember back when those existed, and my favorite was Hollywood Video because they never carded me, even though I was obviously underage, although I may have looked 18 or older because I'm pretty sure I was losing my hair even then. I've been able to get into rated R movies even in the theater since I was 15. So I'd look at it and I'd just judge movies based on their covers. So if you had a real cool looking cover, I'd check your film out. That's how I watched Tremors, and I was really disappointed that the monster on the cover looked nothing like the monsters in the movie, but I ended up loving that anyway. And then I'd watch something like Troll 2 because I thought the cover seemed so appealing, and you know, at that time I didn't know what bad movie making was, so I just enjoyed it, you know, for its entertainment value, and I actually still like it now to this day, probably because of that. But then there were movies that I had no interest in watching simply because I was not impressed by the cover. Then one of those cases was Evil Dead. I mean, actually, I think even more so than the cover itself was, I thought the name Evil Dead sounded stupid. I wasn't a huge zombie fan at that time, and I guess I just presumed that it was a zombie movie. So then, you know, over the years, I'd constantly see the covers for both Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. No desire to watch it. Well, sometime during this point, I ended up seeing Army of Darkness on the television, and I ended up really liking it, but I never caught the title. This was back before you could just hit the info button. You actually had to go to the guide, which was like on channel 62 or 63 or maybe even 61. And, you know, then they would slowly scroll down. And this was before the internet, so I just somehow missed what it was called. And I had thought about it through the years about how cool that movie was. And I eventually, once I first got the internet, I just happened to be reading some reviews, and I thought this Army of Darkness, I don't even know why it was drawn to the review, but I thought it sounded suspiciously like the movie I had seen so many years before, so I ended up looking up for more information about it, and then I learned of the connection to the Evil Dead movies, so I was kind of annoyed with myself, and I decided to check those out, and I saw the first Evil Dead, nothing like I was expecting. I was expecting more of a comedy, and Evil Dead was, I thought, a truly terrifying movie. Now, some people don't agree. They think it's silly or stupid or just a bad movie that happens to have some unintentional hilarity to be found from it. No, I was a genuine fan. I thought it was pretty creepy, and even the parts that were a little silly and over the top somehow seemed more menacing because of the campiness. I don't think I've ever seen a movie do that so successfully since then. And then I loved that, so I watched Evil Dead 2, and that was a little more what I was expecting. But it was a good marriage of horror and comedy. I thought it was both, you know, pretty creepy and intense at parts, and it was also, you know, funny and lighthearted. It was an interesting movie in terms of tone, but I ended up loving it just the same. And then I'd go back and watch Army of Darkness, which I, at that time, remembered thinking was better than both Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. And then I suddenly had a change of opinion. I like it. I thought Army of Darkness was good, but I didn't like it as much as its predecessors. So then that was pretty much the last time I watched those movies, up until they started showing Evil Dead 2 at the Madstone Theater, and that had kind of a reputation of showing older movies, and I'm a huge sucker of watching, you know, older films in the theaters because I obviously couldn't watch them when they first came out. And it was one of the funnest experiences I've ever had when it came to going to the movies. And it was showing like at midnight or something. It was really late, and there was a bunch of people there, and it was the perfect party movie. Just a great atmosphere, great crowd, and a great movie. So I had hopes that they'd go ahead and make an Evil Dead 4, and there were rumors floating about that, you know, there'd even be a crossover with, you know, Ash and then Freddy vs. Jason, which I thought would have been awesome, but that didn't work out. And then they finally announced the remake, and dread filled my stomach. I did not want to see Evil Dead remade. I wanted to see an Evil Dead 4. And then the casting decisions and they chose the director. Nothing about it was really exciting to me. The only person who really stood out was the writer, Diablo Cody. She's known for doing Juno and Jennifer's Body, but I haven't seen either of those. You know, I'm sure Juno is probably a good movie, but I don't like that over wittiness that the trailers for both of those films really conveyed to me. It was kind of obnoxious, but maybe I'll watch them one day. So interesting choice, but nothing that got me excited. Well, then I ended up seeing the trailer, and the trailer I thought was actually pretty cool, especially the Red Band version. And then the reviews started coming in, and everybody was surprisingly positive. It really started to get me excited for this movie. I had a lot of hope now. So then I went to the theaters. I could not wait to see this, and I was really fucking disappointed. It's not bad. It's competently made. It succeeds in the areas I guess it should succeed in. But as a whole, I just felt it was a surprisingly ordinary horror film that added nothing new. I kept comparing it to the original, which probably is a mistake, but the original just, I guess, fit my standards or my tastes a lot better than the remake did. And it just, as a whole, nothing I felt stood out as exceptional. So I have no idea why the critics and fans are embracing this so much, but at the same time they rejected, the Black Christmas remake or the Friday the 13th remake. I'd say it's comparable to those. It succeeds in the bare minimum, but as a gore film, but nothing more than that. So sorry. I obviously I'm in the minority here, but I'm going to explain why I disliked it. And yes, a lot of my complaints are subjective because I am going to be comparing it to the original Evil Dead. First off, story. Even though the reason for being at the cabin are different, it's pretty much the same setup. They reuse a lot of the same plot devices. But otherwise, it's the same story, I guess. But I felt they explained too much. There's a lot more information given here about the demons, why they're doing what they're doing, how they're able to, possess people, how they can be killed. And, there's nothing wrong with that in itself, but I actually preferred how the original kept everything shrouded in mystery. It was ambiguous as to why they were doing everything, how they could be killed, and, how they're spreading their infection to other people. I just like that more, even though, as I said, in itself, it's not a valid complaint. Most horror movies try to give some information as to why and how, but it just, once again, be preferring the original over this. But, I will say that throughout the bulk of the film, there was nothing abnormally bad about the script. The dialogue was uninspired but fine. The stupid parts are fairly, familiar. I've seen those in many of other horror films, and I've been more forgiving, towards them. So why would I get hung up on, characters doing stupid things to serve the plot? But the ending I thought was unforgivably retarded. I can't even talk about it without spoiling, unfortunately, but something happens that's a total ass pull. It makes no sense. It totally betrays the continuity, and this is followed up with one of the most retarded final boss fights I've ever seen. Just because, alright, I guess I'll say it this way. The main villain is summoned, and it's supposed to be all scary, and there's a few nice touches, like, for example, it's raining blood. That's kind of cool. But how is this thing a threat to anybody? Okay, yeah, sure, it apparently has some superhuman strength, but it's no more a danger to the world than that horned monster from Conan the Destroyer was. Yeah, would I want to fight it in a one-on-one battle? No, but if you got me and 3 friends, I'm sure we'd be able to take it on, so big disappointment there. I hate it when movies do that. They build up this creature so much, and then it's just like, The doctor's wife from Evil Dead 2 was far more intimidating than this thing. So yeah, but other than that, there was nothing abnormally bad about the script. The characters, they're just, it's a typical generic cast. The characterizations either make them annoying or entirely forgettable. I did not like the main guy in this movie. The actor who portrays him is very uncharismatic. He was the same guy who played the love interest from Red Riding Hood, and he was just as boring in that movie as he is here. But the characterization is that he's very indecisive, he's pretty weak, and it just gets obnoxious after a while. You just start to really hate him because he's supposed to be the main character, and yet he's just reluctant to do anything. And you could argue that, yeah, Ash was the same way in the original one. Yeah, but this worked for 3 reasons. For one, it wasn't as pronounced with Ash. he had more to him than that. Two, the first Evil Dead was actually an ensemble piece, kind of like Alien or Friday the 13th, where Ash only became the main character because everybody else was dead by that point. Otherwise, I would have presumed that Scott was the protagonist, because he was the one who was more active in the plot. But here, David, the main character, he is more obviously the main character. There's really no question to it. And then the third problem is that with Ash, there was a payoff. By the end of the film, he is finally doing something. He's become kind of a badass. Whereas here, you never really get that transformation. So I just hated that character. Horrible lead. His sister, Mia, she was actually more interesting. I thought the actress gave an exceptional performance, whereas everybody else is just sort of I think the actress really can go places. She did really good. In terms of the rest of the cast, the dude with the glasses had the most face-palming moments. The one part I did think was really stupid was how he summons the creatures, him reading the incantations. If I remember Evil Dead correctly, they just play the tape, and the professor is the one who reads them out, and they don't really know what's going on, so I could understand that. Plus, they were just kind of joking around about it. Here, they go into the basement where there's a bunch of dead cats hanging around. It was obviously, something had happened. There's bloodstains everywhere, and, I'm not going to be in the mood to be screwing around with a book that has all this demented witchcraft stuff, even if I don't believe it. And then so him being alone and just reading it out loud seemed very forced. So yeah, that character tested my patience, but he also at least did stuff, whereas David, our hero, wasn't doing anything. So he turned out to be somewhat sympathetic in that regard. And everybody else was just really generic. There's just two other girls, David's girlfriend and then just a med student. But they don't really have any kind of character. They're really boring. At least the darker skinned girl, the med student, she has a personality, but even then, not enough to really, for me to care for her. So the characters were all disappointments. The cast from the original Evil Dead was so much more interesting. In terms of gore, I thought the gore was less unsettling than the first Evil Dead, but at the same time, this probably was where the film actually shined. They used a lot of practical effects. The gore effects are spectacular. At no point, with the exception of when a character is lit on fire, did I ever feel anything look fake. And one thing that's cool, too, is that the attacks, they aren't often fatal. So, you'll have a demon attack somebody, and they're not going to kill him, but they are going to hurt him. And those scenes are going to make you cringe. There's one part where a demon takes a nail gun and starts shooting at people. And they don't miss, but they don't kill anybody either. So, there's plenty of scenes where, you see nails going to people's arms, and it's just really painful to watch. And it seems like every character takes a beating. And there are some interesting touches to these attacks, too, that I thought kind of gave the film a mean streak. A good mean streak, though. One that was necessary. Like, during a possession, one chick starts to pee herself. You don't see that kind of stuff in horror films. And it's weird, because you'd think people would be pissing their pants all the time and if they were in a situation like this, but you don't see it very often, so I liked how they did that here. So those kind of touches at least made this for a pretty decent, splatterfest. And that's why I don't like the film, but I don't hate it either. In fact, had the hype not been so excessive, had my hopes not been this high, I probably would have been a lot more forgiving towards this film's failures, because as just a bloodbath, I thought Evil Dead was okay. The villains weren't as good as the original either, primarily because they felt more like Exorcist knockoffs. In the original, they had more abstract, bizarre makeup. Like, I think one had almost white skin. That was at least different, and they had a much more high-pitched, cackling voice. It seemed like the demons were having a blast, tormenting these people. They were just, all in all, more engaging as villains. Did the lights just flicker? Whereas here, you really just feel like they just took the demon from The Exorcist and put it in this movie. So it's much more conventional, not as interesting, even though, the demons do have personalities. But once again, I liked how the demons had no real motives in the original. They were just kind of fucking around with the characters, whereas here they have reasons to be killing them. So I was a little disappointed there, even though the makeup effects on them were great. geez, what else can I say? It's much more rapid fire with its pacing. The action gets started rather quickly. There's quite a few jump scares, but for the most part, there's no sense of... They don't really build any suspense. There's no real atmosphere. One thing I liked about the original was that there was a lot of great build-up and there's a lot of atmosphere. The feeling of paranoia, I'm losing my voice, was very strong in the original Evil Dead at the very end, and it just made everything much more edgy and frightening. Here, I never thought it was scary. It's just lots of gore. That's it. I didn't feel any of the suspense or atmosphere. Anything else I could say? Oh yeah, by the way, they do indicate at the very, very end, past the credits, that we aren't watching a remake. We are actually watching a sequel. This actually would have been pretty cool, but it just didn't fit. The continuity errors are too noticeable. For example, in the original Evil Dead, or maybe it was Evil Dead 2, a demon gets buried and then it just comes back up. Here, if you bury them, they're gone. So that didn't work. But at the same time, I guess I have to admit that these films have never been very faithful to their previous continuity. Evil Dead rewrote all of Evil Dead 1, or Evil Dead 2 rewrote all of Evil Dead 1, and Army of Darkness did the same thing. So maybe that's a nitpick on my part. Maybe I should not be complaining about that. But, yeah. So, yeah, all in all, this isn't an abnormally bad movie. It's just a typical bloodbath. I've seen many horror films of this quality before, and yet the critics slammed them. So I have no idea why people are so excited about this. Had I had lower expectations, I probably would have liked it more. But as a whole, I just thought it was a total letdown. Everything that I liked about Evil Dead 1 is not present here. And on its own, I just thought it was average, mediocre, maybe a little bit above average because the gore is that good. But all in all, disappointment. Would I recommend it? It's up to you. I'd say it's a rental in terms of quality, but if you're like me and you feel like you have to see it, you're going to see it anyway. And at the same time, I wouldn't fault you for it because I am in the minority. So maybe you shouldn't take my review that seriously. Maybe you should get a second opinion, or at least really consider what I say and decide for yourself if that sounds appealing to you. If you'd like to read my written review, please check the link in my description. I also have written reviews for Maximum Overdrive and the Kickboxer franchise, so check those out. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, and that is all I've got, so I'll see you guys later.